Please be seated. Good morning, all you stalwart souls who have braved the weather to be here this morning. And good morning to all of you who are joining us online. I lived many years in Washington Heights, and people there say, buen dia. Much of my career as a pediatrician was spent in Harlem, and I'd often be greeted with, how you feel? I grew up in Wyoming, where we say, howdy do. Well, however you say good morning, it's a pleasure to have you with us at Cathedral St. John the Divine, one of the great places of worship in the world, and it's an honor for me to be standing here before you. The Advent season falls at the darkest time of the year, and the natural symbols of darkness and light are powerfully at work throughout Advent and Christmas. We wait pensively for a child who will become our light in the darkness. I don't know about you, but this year seems to me darker than most. It's colder, it's snowing, I'm older, groceries are more expensive, my wife says I'm grouchier. The morning's headlines feel menacing, and my world that recently seemed so stable now feels in jeopardy. But I have known darker times. I spent my career taking care of children with AIDS. Some of you will remember the 1980s and 90s when we discovered that Central Harlem had the highest rate of mother-baby HIV in the United States, and AIDS became the leading killer of children in Harlem. My patients in those days were dying one by one, and there were stretches when I went to a funeral a week. Many babies were abandoned by their mothers, or they were orphaned. People were scared away from becoming foster parents because of stigma and fear. So these babies languished, sometimes months, sometimes years, in hospitals. We called them border babies with AIDS. In response, we created a group foster home in an old brick former convent at 173rd and Audubon, up in Washington Heights, Incarnation Children's Center, a collaboration between Harlem Hospital, Columbia University, and the Catholic Archdiocese of New York. I'd never even met a nun, but now I was working with 7 short, formidable Irish Catholic nuns. They called us Dr. Steve and the Seven Sisters. In the fall of 1989, a 5-month-old baby, whose name was Paul, was transferred to Incarnation from Woodhull Hospital. His mother had abandoned him. Paul was born with HIV, syphilis, and tuberculosis, and he'd never left the hospital until he transferred to us. His birth weight was 5 pounds, and at 5 months of age, he weighed the same, 5 pounds. He barely cooed, he rarely smiled, he was floppy, without head control, couldn't roll over, couldn't bring a toy to his mouth. I sat by his crib and I shook my head. One of the nuns was nearby, and I said to her name was Sister Jetty Canary. I said to her, I'm not optimistic that we can do anything for this baby. She gently reached out and touched me on the shoulder and said, young doctor, when optimism dies, hope is born. After our worst fears have been realized, hope can survive like a flame in the night. Keep the faith. Keep the faith. In today's gospel reading, John the Baptist, the powerful, austere man who spent his life preparing the way for the coming Messiah, is in Herod's dungeon and is having a hard time keeping the faith. In the darkness of his putrid cell, he wonders if he's been wrong all these years. He sends word to Jesus, are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? He's no longer sure. Jesus doesn't send back reassurances, but asks the messengers, just as he asks us, to open eyes and use ears to know the evidence of the Son of Man. The proof of the Messiah is not in a throne, but in lives healed, burdens lifted, and outcasts restored. Shortly after Paul arrived at Incarnation Children's Center, the first AIDS drug for children became available, and Paul was my first patient to receive treatment. He was also cared for round the clock by child care workers, most of whom were immigrants from the Dominican Republic. And they fed him, they sang to him, they loved him. They called him Paulie. And soon we witnessed a transformation. It was as if Paulie woke up. He began to laugh and smile. He started to sit up, crawl, and then he began to walk. He began to grow. Now, I learned that if there's anything Dominican mothers love most, it's a fat baby. And soon Paul began to gain so much weight, we called him the Pillsbury Doughboy. He eventually went into foster care with a loving couple who then adopted him, moved to Puerto Rico, and I lost track of him. But I often wondered how he was doing because so many of my patients from those early days died. At any rate, during the 1990s, AIDS treatment improved so much that suddenly my little dying patients with AIDS stopped dying. We discovered that pregnant women with HIV infection could be treated so they could give birth to AIDS-free babies. The pediatric AIDS epidemic slowed, and then it ended in Harlem, in the United States, in resource-rich countries. Then we turned our attention to resource-poor places like Sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean, in Haiti, the Dominican Republic. And for the past 2 decades, wondrous progress has been made. My optimism has been at an all-time high. But recently, I've watched forces gather that are beginning to reverse this hard-won progress, globally as well as here in the United States. Funding streams that support public health, HIV prevention and treatment, and AIDS research have been cut or frozen. Perhaps the most telling indication of the U.S. government's new mindset was the recent announcement that World AIDS Day, which has been on December 1st for the last 37 years, will no longer be recognized. Is AIDS one more inconvenient truth in our country's history that is about to be expunged from our national memory? We're sliding dangerously backwards. UNICEF has issued a warning that if these cutbacks are not reversed, in the next 15 years, over 1 million children will die from HIV, an infection that is preventable and treatable. So no, I'm not optimistic. And yet today's opening Gregorian chant, that beautiful Gregorian chant, begins Gaudete, rejoice. This is the third Sunday in Advent, referred to as Gaudete Sunday, a day to rejoice. Today's candle on the Advent wreath that you see right there on the right side is rose-colored, which is symbolic of joy. Today's joy doesn't deny the darkness. It declares something more defiant, that Christian joy isn't the same as good news on your phone or a week when everything goes your way. Joy is what happens when hope stays lit. Joy is what survives prison. Joy is what refuses to let the darkness name reality. This past week, when I was working on this homily, I was sent a video link to a panel presentation at Howard University Hospital in Washington, D.C., that explored the impacts of HIV-related stigma on long-term survivors. One of the panelists was a young, dark-skinned man, 36 years old, who was born with HIV. He looked healthy, He was a little chubby and was poised and articulate. He looked familiar. It was then that I realized who it was. Paulie. Paulie is alive. He spoke with authority. He was advocating for others who have carried HIV in their bodies since birth, and he still looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. And in that moment, I could hear Sister Jetty's voice: when optimism dies, hope is born. Something else she might have said, she's very fond of saying this, had she been sitting with me watching the video: there are moments like this that scared the bejesus out of you. Sister Jetty died last year at age 92. Some of us came here this morning feeling optimistic. Some of us did not. Some of us are in our own prison. Grief, fear for our children, fear for our country, fear for the world. But Advent doesn't ask you to manufacture optimism. Advent asks you to wait in the dark with God and to guard the flame. So today, gaudete, rejoice, not because everything is fine, but because Christ is coming, and the light that is coming into the world will be strong, and it will be forever. Keep the faith. Amen.